Hey guys, Jessica Henry here. I wanted to welcome you today to my video. I am doing a portrait painting. I thought it'd be fun to kind of mix things up a little bit. I'm only going to take about halfway through the process of portrait painting because really the essential parts of painting are in the beginning, getting the drawing accurate and the composition, and I also wanted to talk about that emotive quality that's really important. All right, thanks so much for joining, and I hope if you like it, you go ahead and like and subscribe. All right, thanks guys. Okay, so this is the palette that I will be using today. And this is my beautiful model and her son. And then this is about as far as I'm going to take this painting today. So I'm going to only use 3 colors to start out with: yellow ochre, burnt sienna, and ultramarine blue. And I'm just going to take a thin wash of Gamsol in those 3 colors. And I'm toning the canvas. Yeah, I have it on high speed here. It's like one of those old-fashioned movies. So I like to add a little bit of texture and color variation to the canvas as I tone, because if some of it shows through, I think it's kind of interesting. So to begin, I'm just going to get an inky mixture of ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. And I will get a little bit of Gamsol into that to thin it out. And using a small brush, I begin by just massing in where I want my characters to sit on the canvas. And I'm taking into account the distance relationships from the objects themselves to the edge of the canvas, allowing for enough space for air to sort of breathe and go around them. And so I'm happy with the size and placement there. What I was just doing there is I was giving myself a plumb line on the reference. And I find it easier to work from a black and white than the color picture. I'm just focusing on the values. So I've given myself the plumb line, and I drew it on the actual photograph, and I drew it on my canvas. I did not want it evenly in the middle, so I kind of moved my plumb line over a little bit. Placing some marks where I wanted the top of the head to be in relation to the edge of the canvas, and where I wanted her son to sort of rest in that area. I start mapping out lines and just loosely massing in, and then I take some measurements. And getting that angle of the eye line parallel with the angle of the bottom of the nose and the angle of the mouth is critical to beginning any portrait. If either one of those are not exactly in line with the other, it's going to look off. So that was what I was working on there with the nose and the eyes and the mouth, and as well as the hairline too. So here I am taking and comparing the length of her head to his head, and then on my drawing, on the painting, I will measure where his head comes into comparison with her head so that I can get the size proportioned correctly. So I reverse it. On my photograph, I measure one thing to the other, and then on the painting, I measure the other thing to the main thing, if that makes sense. And then I will also draw vertical lines and see where they connect with objects. It's sort of like gridding, but you have to draw a line up to see where things intersect. For example, his nose, if I drew it straight up, would hit the corner of her eye. And so those are key elements. And I may not even draw it on the reference, but I'm doing that in my head just to see where everything falls. And if I had a model in front of me, obviously you can't go up and draw vertical lines, but you can hold your brush up or just use your eye and kind of see where things fall in line with each other. So keeping my brush really loose, I find it so much easier to draw the painting on the canvas rather than using a pencil or charcoal, because it's easier to erase. You can just move things around. I'm already thinking about massing things in, and I'm thinking about the painting process by using a brush. So for that matter, I only ever use a brush to get my image on the canvas. And I would never, ever project my image onto the canvas, not to speed up or for more accuracy. I'm a traditionalist, so it's the old way for me. And what I'm doing here is I'm erasing my tone on the canvas. I like to tone a canvas right before I paint because of this reason. So I will draw the image on the canvas, and I'm thinking already I've got the middle tone down, and I'll start to put some of my dark accents down, thinking of 3 values, light, medium, and dark. To get that light value, then I will start erasing some of that tone that I put down. And I'm able to start seeing it become sculpted without adding white. If you notice at the beginning, I didn't have any white when I just showed you those 3 colors. And most of this video, I'm only using Ultramarine Blue, Burnt Sienna, and Yellow Ochre. For the lighter values, of course, like I just said, I erase. So I'm just focusing on trying to get those elements looking the way that they're supposed to quickly, so that it starts to read sort of like a cohesive idea of what I'm doing. I haven't yet really begun with trying hard to get that emotional quality yet. I'm thinking about it, and I'm starting to plan things that I want to do to really capture that feeling of love and emotion. For example, I'm going to soften edges into edges, like where his cheek touches her and her chin touches his forehead, and places like that. I'll be losing edges and softening things. It'll just have that feeling of being connected. So in the meantime, like I said, I'm just working on erasing things and pulling out stronger accents. At this point, it's not a concern of mine so much about brush stroke quality as it is about getting the drawing accurate. And you can also take your paper towel here and twist it into a point to really, really rub down some of the canvas, because it's kind of hard to get it off with your brush. I dip my brush in the Gamsol or turpentine, dry it off really well on my paper towel, and then I erase. But sometimes it's just really hard to get it down to the white of the canvas if you want a special highlight by doing this. And you can do entire paintings doing this method of, it's sort of like grisaille, but with grisaille you're actually using white paint and making basically a black and white painting. In this case, it's mostly a tonal study with a thin wash. And so I'm measuring where I was drawing a vertical line with my brush to see where the mouth intersected with the eye and down onto his face. Portraits are a funny thing, especially to share them publicly, because there's always passages where you think, oh, it's just, that looks so awful. But, you know, I'm just human, and I have no problem with you seeing my mistakes, and, you know, it's just part of the game of doing portraits. Sometimes it looks rough for a while, but if you just keep holding on and not letting go of that final vision in your head, and just keep working at it and not giving up, that's half the battle. One thing I noticed, even here as I'm looking at it doing this voiceover, her brow bone on my paintings, you can see it there in the photograph, is more delicate. In my painting, it's a little too masculine, so I have to fix that. The far angle where her face touches the background, that angle of her brow bone was too horizontal. It was down too low, so I had to raise it up. And right where my hand is, right there, her brow bone has a highlight, which doesn't look right, so I toned that down too. And in doing those two things, it gives her a more feminine forehead. And so I'm just trying to be cognizant of those things that are making it not read the way I want it to. Little battles I fought. This is it up close. You can't really see that while I'm working on it. But working on her hair, love the free, fast brushwork you can get here, keeping it under control, but having a good time with that. And again, I'm just using Ultramarine Blue and Burnt Sienna to get that black color. If you don't have any white in your bristles at all, it can get as black as you can. Trying to get the shape of her head. That angle, people usually have more cranium than we think. So it's always a challenge to try to look for all those angles. The top of the head flat, and then back where the head crests, there's another subtle angle up there, and then it comes around. Also taking into account the overall shape and mass of the hair. Try not to think about in terms of just individual strands, but just that massing, that beautiful overall shape. As I'm laying down the hair pieces, I'm thinking about the way it would fall and using my brush strokes to help identify that form. Wow, that's really fast. I love it setting it on fast forward though, because otherwise this video would be really long. So I did kind of speed it up and I edited portions, but letting my brush strokes show the form of the hair just kind of helped with not having to draw or paint all those highlights, but I'll just keep it quiet and simple, unify that whole mass. And you'll see once in a while, I do put in, that I was actually erasing highlights right there in her hair, just to pull out some of that highlights, because I didn't put any white on my palette yet either. Once in a while, I will plop in some background to help sort of establish the values and shapes that I'm trying to get. So this is, I'm about to get to this place in the painting where I'm working on the boy's face. And there I'm putting in some of the backgrounds. Helps to see where I'm going with it all. And then I can also start concentrating on some of that emotional quality by losing the edges that I talked about at the beginning. Want to lose her head to the background a little bit, since that contour really isn't going to help tell the story. So anywhere I can lose edges or lose focal concentration, I'm going to, just to keep the focus right where I need it. Just working on some of the shape in there. This gives you a better shot of what I'm doing with her hair. All right, now I'm going to spend some time working on his face. And I like that in the image that I was using, he wasn't really looking directly at us, which sometimes in a portrait, that can be unnerving to some people. And I like to keep things as pleasant as possible to the largest amount of people as possible. So I like it where they're just kind of looking off. And again, in here, I'm just sort of erasing passages. You'll see I'm actually using quite a bit more brushes in this painting demo than I normally use, because sometimes when you get a brush full of the turpentine, no matter how often you wipe it out, it just seems to still be in the bristles, and it can become too much on your painting. So I'll get a dry brush and rub it out. So here I'm using some burnt sienna to get that. I didn't want it any ultramarine blue in there because it would look like a 5 o'clock shadow. And so same with his ear. I'm just kind of putting a tone down, and then into that I'll add accents and erase highlights. And I noticed as I was working on this on the first day, the little boy looked like maybe he was less than 2 years old. But in real life, he's 3, and I wanted it to look a little bit more accurate. So on the second day of working on this painting, I try to thin him out a little bit and stay truer to the painting, or excuse me, the photograph. I'm still not 100% satisfied, and that is one area where I'm going to still continue on this painting when I'm working on it later. Are we ever really satisfied with the finished product? There's always things that I could tweak and work on paintings. So I'm softening that edge where that burnt sienna comes up into the highlight of his cheek. I really wanted that soft baby fuzz peach-like feeling to his cheek, even on this first layer. And I'm showing you an approach here to painting portraits that I find is the very easiest approach to portrait painting possible. I've studied under a lot of different artists, and instead of just jumping right in with paint, by erasing and pushing and pulling with just a tonal study like this, it seems more manageable, and I found that students are able to grasp this more controllable approach than getting wrapped up in how to mix color tones and how to apply paint and thinking topography with the paint and all that. All those things are good, But if you're just starting out with portrait painting, or you want to try a new approach to capturing portraits, this method of what I have found is just, I mean, I'm not the first one to come up with it, but I found it to be really manageable, and a lot of people enjoy it. And the painting starts to look really finished really quick. It gives you a sense of where it's going to go. So on here, when I do get into color, I'll talk about that. It's just really thin layers because I let some of this tonal study show through. So all my thinking is done here. It's like a glorified thumbnail sketch. Working on some of that, sculpting out her forehead shape. I'm trying to get that a little bit better in her nose shape. She has this gorgeous chiseled nose that I wanted to make sure I really captured. So ears, fabulous study. I love the beautiful ins and outs of an ear. You don't want to get carried away on them though, because they're fun to paint with all the little twists and turns and highlights and shadows, but they can also become distracting. And since I want to keep the eyes focused in just that whole little nucleus of mom and child, if I painted a really detailed ear, it would have drawn the eye away. So I'm just gonna suggest the highlights and shadows and leave it. Same thing with her hand when I get to that, which actually I don't show me painting it, but it's the same thing. And although I am going to work a little bit more on the hand, her hand, than where the finished painting ends up. Because as humans, when we see hands in a painting, we are very sensitive to whatever those hands' moods are telling us to feel. So in this case, her hand is very tenderly placed on his hair. It's very intimate, and I want to make sure that that hand is delicate and really reflects that love. So much love is transmitted through the hands. So I'm going to work on that a little more. I loved his neck and these little highlights and the folds. I felt that that twist in his neck was important, and so I'm always picking and choosing what I want to add and subtract in a painting. And just cleaning up that hand a little bit, working on the external contours of it. I saw that the angle there wasn't quite right. That main knuckle needed to come out a little further. And as far as measuring and using a more classical approach, I use this term classical impressionism to reflect what it is that I do. I was taught through the classical ateliers a very traditional approach to measuring and working in layers and layers and layers to create a painting. And I was also taught a very impressionistic approach to painting. And so what I have come up with is a combination of what I feel is the strengths of both worlds that I have found. So in my classical approach, I'm using all these measuring tools, the plumb lines, and you know, just dropping lines down and thinking about that in terms of that classical atelier background. And then instead of doing thin layers built up over time in the classical traditions, I will, once I get this done and in place, excuse me, I jump right into color. And I love to play with that impressionistic styling of the brushwork. A lot of people think Impressionism is Monet or Renoir, but that by definition, Impressionism is taking your impression and incorporating that onto the canvas. So I'm not a photorealist, so I like to really embrace that impressionistic quality and translate what I am feeling from my subject, whether it's a still life or a landscape or a portrait, and capture that impression on canvas. So that's where I get the term classical impressionism in a nutshell. So again here, just working on getting his arms tucked in her arm, and getting all that to read properly. And again, I'm adding some of that background color to rework the shape of her hand and arm there. And when I think about portrait painting, I think about how every life has a story, and our eyes are like a window to the soul, and Rembrandt was a master at capturing that, and that is something I really try to convey, is to tell the story. Show me who these people were with every painting, every portrait. Always thinking about movement of light, what the story is all about. Where do I want the viewer to look? Where should the eyes rest in this painting? How long should the viewer stay in a certain area? Where should I have them go after they've looked at this for a while? You know, moving the eye throughout the canvas. It's very much like composing a song. You have rhythm and tempo, and you hold the audience. And that's what I'm thinking about. Thinking about in here too, just getting the angles, these subtle little angles of her eye just right. If they're off even a millimeter, it shows. So I'm comparing all the time, flicking my eye back and forth from the painting to the reference. And sometimes I will, and I think I do later in this video, is I'll tape the reference right to the canvas. On this first day it was wet, the canvas was, so I wasn't able to tape to it, but the second day I did. And that helps. You can kind of refine the shapes a little better. And even though it shows that I'm working really quickly here in this video, this first day was a 3-hour segment, and I edited it down to be like, I don't know, 15-20 minutes. The next day I worked on the painting total about 7 hours, and you'll see I didn't get all of that obviously on video, just a little bit, and I thought I would just highlight some of those things. But you want to go slow, very slow in the beginning, and think about every brushstroke and everything you're doing. Rushing through a painting is only going to make you want to throw it away faster, so take your time. And I remember this woodworking book I had called Measure Twice, Cut Once. Same idea. You don't want to make more than a few brush strokes as you're laying down color with the brush. Just slow, careful. Another topic I wanted to hit on was sculpting with your painting, and to think about topography all the time. If something is closer to us, it's going to get more highlight, more color, brushwork. It's warmer. As things go away, they're cooler, less brushwork. I know I've been saying that before, especially with landscapes, but the face and still lifes, it's really, the concepts are all the same, and they work with whatever style you're working on. So you want to think about, if a sculptor was looking at your painting, would they be able to sculpt the person that you're painting? So that is something to think about with when you're painting too. You want to think about what your light source is. If it's natural light, your highlights are most likely going to be cool, and your shadows are going to be warm. You can never have cool shadows, cool highlights. It always has to be one or the other. Warm highlights, cool shadows, vice versa. So in this case, especially when I get into color more here, I kept the shadows a little bit cooler and the highlights a little bit warmer. I really didn't go into much of the color and skin tones in this painting process because I really wanted to just focus on the drawing and getting that placement down accurately. And you can see too here, as I've been working, I've been softening some of the edges. You can see where his face touches her and the chin, just to add that feeling of connection and that emotion. Always look for that in whatever it is you're painting, even just a still life. If you've got a peach sitting on a countertop, connect that peach to the counter. Look for places where you can lose edges. a tree to the sky. You don't want it to look cut out. Connect it. There's that almost a spiritual quality to that too, when you can connect things to this thing and that thing. It makes sense. So I'm working here on her arm, just trying to get some of that. I wanted the arm as part of the story. It's not done, but you can see here in this example of the painting that this is now day 2. And I added white and cad yellow pale to the canvas, as well as alizarin crimson. And there is the color picture. You can see the highlights are kind of cooler and the shadows were warm. I might have said that in reverse before. So this is the beginning of day 2, and I am just laying down a very thin layer of some white and yellow ochre. A little bit of alizarin crimson to give it some of that fleshy tone. And you can see too the angle of her forehead where it touches that background back there. I did make it a little steeper and softened that highlight that was around her eyebrow, which made her forehead look a lot more feminine. Like I said before, she has this gorgeous chiseled nose, and so it was just such a joy to paint. I loved these highlights and this shadow as it came down the side. It's just there's a close up of it, so you can see where the bridge of the nose has a sharper edge, and then where it softens before reaching the ball of the nose, I would soften and lose that edge to the background. And then the ball part, I did a little bit sharper because I wanted it to feel like it comes away. There's the painting, where it feels like it comes away from the far background cheek. And so you can see what I was talking about there. And then where the fleshy sides of the nose come down, I'm thinking about the sinus cavity inside there, and where it would have a little bit more highlights, and then that's a cooler tone down the side. I'm popping in a few highlights where I see them, right on the edge of the nose there, the bone, and that highlight is very cool. And right in there, right where the eye closes, there's a nice little spot for a highlight where it picks up the light. And then the brow bone would have, and as well as where the forehead turns and goes back, would all be receiving just one little spot of highlight. And then I don't really do much of it as it goes down the face because I'm thinking about the movement of light. It's stronger on top and then it fades down dark into shadow. And I think that that's lovely. Rembrandt was a master at movement of light. And so I'm just refining shapes in her eye. And all the time, even still, I'll go through and just check my measurements to see that things are reading a little bit more accurately. And then I'm going to focus on hair for a little bit. Just pulling out a few highlights now that I have white on my palette. I'm going to mix white with some yellow ochre to get a warm highlight effect. You can see here a little bit of the finished product of her face, and I'm going to focus on her hair. Again, just the Ultramarine Blue and Burnt Sienna. Going to mix a little bit of white in with that mixture. It just makes a nice even gray. Thinking about her skull and the shape of the skull under the hair, it's going to pick up highlights in that particular area. And it was just like that on the photo. Oh, this is my palette. Everything is organized. I've got my greens and my all my skin tones together. All right, as I'm thinking about the sculpture of her hair, it's easy to get carried away, so I'm trying to just temper it, and I step back every now and then and I look at the whole thing. Again, always keeping in mind, where do I want the viewer to look? If I put a lot of detail or information in this place or that place, is it going to draw the eye? Some places need a little bit of information just so that it isn't a dead spot. It, adding some skin color to that passage right back there, so there's a little window in the hair. But you want to think about hair in terms of a sculpted mass. I'm just popping in a few of the highlights, allowing the brush to define the shape. And for skin tone, even though I didn't show much of painting it on here, I just stuck with the same palette. I used a mixture of yellow ochre, alizarin crimson, and white, and into that I might warm it up with some cadmium yellow pale or cool it down with some alizarin crimson. But that was basically my skin mixture in this. All right, thank you so much. All right, well that wraps it up. I wanted to thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope that this was helpful in some way. All right, don't forget to like and subscribe if you liked what you saw. Thanks so much, guys.